I'll figure out how to get screen capture and actually set up my microphone for this. But I want to make a little bit of an example here. So we had the national polls and we were down finally to a three-man race. Now that's not exactly 100% correct for this, but we have Trump, Haley, and DeSantis. And he is currently at 64.6% of Republicans in the polls. And then we have Biden, who has been stuck below 70 for the most part, except in November there, who is at 68.5%. And that's not great because Williamson and Phillips have way lower scores than Haley and DeSantis. So there's a lot of undecided voters who don't like their options very well, where there are a lot of decided voters in the Republican Party who will probably be not enthusiastic to vote for Trump, but willing to do so. Now, I went through some information with the candidates. So I went through this website on Ballotpedia, which allows you to look up different locations. So this one is Puerto Rico, for example, and you can search it and look at ballots. You can see that DeSantis, Haley, and Trump are on the primary ballot for Puerto Rico, which is a little bit of an interesting fact. But one of the states that has some of the most candidates on it is, of course, New Hampshire. Going to there, you can see the different races, and then you have the one for January 23rd. Have it on detailed, doesn't really matter. Detailed just means that this is expanded. And then you have President Bodie. He has run before. I have him in one of my Excel sheets in the election results. If I go to the presidential elections, let's see where he is. Should be here. Here he is. Eric, President R19, Bodie. Yeah, in the CUP party. Obviously, he's a joke candidate. CUP, obviously referring to watching you take a leak. Because as far as I'm aware, that acronym doesn't actually mean anything. But he is running in New Hampshire. And he actually got 1,321 votes. Now that might have been updated when they published the final numbers in November of I think it was November. Let's see, actually. Federal elections. Election results. The final results after all the research was published in October 2022. Now, obviously, the numbers didn't change all that much, given that election fraud wasn't really looked into, but 21,283,501, whereas the original was 21,286,365. Anyways, back to what we were talking about, to Ballotpedia. You can see that there are many candidates that are running for the Democrat Party and for the Republican Party. Now, why these numbers are so bad for Biden is if you actually go through every single state, as I have written down here, these are all the third-party Republican, well, not third-party, but the Republican candidates that really don't have a lot of support but they're still there. They're still draining some support from the mainline candidates, the mainline ones being here. Every check mark is a state in which they are on the ballot. Any dash is the states that don't have their primary ballot set up yet, for one reason or another. Now, as you can see, 31 of the 51 quote-unquote states, because we are counting DC in this, are here. The only other two territories that are counted, you have Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands, and the U.S. Virginia Islands, and then America Samoa and Puerto Rico. For Puerto Rico, there's only DeSantis, Haley, and Trump on it, whereas in America Samoa, we have Binkley on top of it, Stuckenberg, and what was it, Swift? Rachel Hannah Swift. Then this is a lot of the Democrat candidates, except for the major ones. There, you have, in America Samoa, you have Bodie, Cambridge, Cornhay, Lyon Sr., Perez Serrato, and of course Phillips and Williamson. Then we have some third-party candidates, plus the mainline Democrat candidates. And there, for those independent candidates, we have James P. Bradley, who is of the American Independent Party, Jill Stein, which is the Green Party, Charles Bailey, who is a Libertarian, Jasmine Sherman of the Peace and Freedom Socialist Party, and then Cornel West, who was previously of the Green Party, now running as independent, but he is listed as another Peace and Freedom Party member. So let's go back to the Republicans. And you can see for the Republicans, there are a few candidates, only two technically, as out of the 31 states and DC, these candidates up here only have one state that they're in, up to Scott Ayers. Whereas the other two, John Castro, mind you, and Rachel Hannah Swift, are in only 3 on 3 ballots. Whereas Stuckenberg is on 15, and Binkley is on 29. Now, if we go back over here to Ballotpedia for the candidates, all the candidates, which there are hundreds and hundreds of them, and I have gone through these on my own to determine which ones may actually play some kind of role in taking up a few votes here or there. Going back to the election results, you can see that some of these candidates actually took up tens of thousands of votes. Plus the Green and Libertarian Party, which took up almost 2.5 million together. And some of these don't really matter, and they were mostly only on ballots in states that were not competitive to begin with, so they're not going to be that important, but they are still there. And I had estimated how many votes they would get if they were actually on the ballot in all 51 states in DC. Having, let's see here, Kanye West, for example, may have gotten as many as 470,000 votes had he been on the ballot in every single state and DC, or as many as 500,000, taking into account even more, but as I went down, there was less and less data to run. The way I figured this out, mind you, is I compared, for example, all the states in which they were on the ballot and compared it to their averages or their spread amongst the mainline candidates that were in every single state, which was just the three major ones: the Libertarians, the Republicans, and the Democrats. But by doing that, you can see that this state, for example, Arkansas, had all of these candidates, all 10 of the major winners, on the ballot. And then you would compare that to how they did in California and Colorado and simply add them together to get that estimate. If Kanye West, for example, had been on the ballot in California, he probably would have actually done better than Howie Hawkins, because in any state in which Kanye was on the ballot, as was Howie Hawkins, you can see Kanye actually got more votes oftentimes, but not always. Not in Minnesota, but he did in Mississippi. He also did in Tennessee and in Utah. Not quite in Vermont, but still. So he actually, if you had him on the ballot in every single state, he would have done better than what Howie Hawkins actually got. But if you put Howie Hawkins on the ballot in every state too, since you see he's missing a few, he still probably would have beaten Kanye, and Kanye would have came in 5th place. But regardless, that is one reason why third parties don't often matter, is because in many of the swing states, these candidates are not actually on the ballot. Actually, you see, Howie Hawkins was actually a write-in on the ballot in Wisconsin. Had he been on the ballot proper, along with the socialist candidate, the other socialist candidate, another socialist candidate, they might have actually drained enough votes away from Biden in order for Trump to win the state. That is one way that elections are actually kind of rigged. Because you can't actually vote for the candidate you want to unless you can write them in. Or a lot of people just aren't aware of these candidates, and since they have no power and no money and no influence, they can't tell people to vote for them, especially since they're not in the debates where they can explain their points of view. Now, you can't just have any old person on the stage, but again, there's something to be said about having 51,000 candidates go to the socialist, which can at least give you an idea of the danger that our country can be in. By the way, the Alliance Party is kinda center-left, and I had hopes for them to break through the third party to at least become the 4th strongest party in America, but they seem unlikely at this point to get there. But for the primary ballot, out of the 31 states, Stuckenberg is on 15 and Binkley is on 21. And again, Binkley took a few votes from, where is it? Here it is. From the other candidates. Hutchinson dropped out. Christie had already dropped out, but some people voted for him anyways, either because they didn't get the memo or they were just hoping that enough people liked him that they could get him a delegate or two. Ramaswamy dropped out. So, Binkley will still get a few votes in, say, New Hampshire, as will Stuckenberg, who are draining Trump in that state, as well as all these other Republicans that are also in New Hampshire. And also remember that a lot of the voters in New Hampshire are independents or Democrats who have registered as Republicans for this particular race. Not many of them, not many Democrats, but a few independents who did. who are voting for Haley in hoping to give her the momentum to run because they'd rather have Haley be the presidential nominee than Trump. And mind you, New Hampshire last election went about 8 points in favor of Biden. So it doesn't matter as much as you might think, but for the terms of snowballing and affecting the other Republican primaries, it might matter if Haley would actually win, which is very unlikely at this point, but still. These draining votes mostly from people who are very anti-Trump, for one reason or another, but more than likely Trump will still earn 50% of the vote, as is the current estimate. Again, this is bad for Biden because if you actually look at Biden's numbers, you can see where all his support is bleeding to. He could barely make 70% even when there were only 3 candidates on the ballot, which was Kennedy, himself, and Williamson. But that eventually changed when Kennedy dropped out to run as an independent, or Dean Phillips to jump in instead. And you can see, while Kennedy was at his height, Biden was at just barely above 60. And he has only grown about 9 points since. So going by the other candidates, again, joke candidates like Vermin Supreme and Paperboy Prince are in there. But they are in there. You can actually see that a lot of states actually kind of really want other candidates in. Whereas the Republicans have very few secondary or tertiary candidates. There are a lot of tertiary candidates for the Democrats because they desperately actually really kind of wanted to replace Biden. Even though they know they have no real hope of doing so, a lot of these candidates are in way more states than what the Republicans did. Which gets even worse when you look at the actual candidates of Biden, Phillips, and Williamson. Because Biden is not in 5 of those states. Because those 5 states have decided to not hold primaries. Now, I want to remind everyone that out of the 50 states and DC, 13 of them did not have a primary for Republicans in 2020. But that was because during the entire race, Trump was very close to 90% across the board. Now, while Trump's numbers are down from that, he is also, well, that one was a definite outlier. But while Trump's numbers are down since then, especially after all the J6 protests, you have to remember that none of these candidates were viable at the time. I mean, they had Haley in here, who I don't think even ran. Whereas the candidates now are actually somewhat viable. In fact, Rocky De La Fonte was in there too. Because Rocky De La Fonte, before he ran as an alliance candidate, would run variably as a Democrat or a Republican, and he would run in 5 races in at least one season. Meaning he was on the ballot in 5 different positions in like 3 different states at one point. So you can tell how much of a joke candidate he was, how much Weld was, and how much Walsh were. Whereas these candidates in 2024 are actually viable, and yet Trump is still holding his own with 3 candidates he is almost to the same popularity amongst Republicans as Biden is amongst Democrats. And amongst independents, it's not even a choice. Amongst independents, Biden's numbers are way down compared to where Trump's are. Going back here, like I said, in 2020, 13 states automatically declared Trump the winner because he was at 90%. Here, 5 states have automatically declared Biden the winner, plus 3 because Phillips is not in 3, for a total of 8. 8. The rest of these may have actual primaries. Now, I'm not going to go back and look at the actual primary ballots of these 31 states, but just because they assume that Biden is going to win, which he will, doesn't mean that Biden is exactly a good candidate. Especially since some of the states seem to be less sure about Biden's inevitability than they were about Trump back in the day. And these 3 candidates, as you can see, rigged against Phillips and Williamson. And then you have the other candidates. Bradley from the American Independent. Then you got Jill Stein, from the Green Party. Then you have a Libertarian, Charles Bawley, who appeared here in the California. And then you had Sherman and West of Peace and Freedom. And then you had all these libertarians. And looking through the libertarian would be Charles. Charles is in 2 states. Then Hornberger is in 3, as is Chase. Some of these are in 2. And looking through the primary ballots, you can see Mapston has self-funded a lot of his own money, as his Mike T. Matt, but Hornberger and Chase Oliver, are getting more contributions than them. And looking at this round of polling, Libertarian polling in South Carolina, they did ranked choice voting, which I explained in a different poll, and they'll take out one candidate, go on to the next round, and you can just look at the results of the rounds. So 804, Joshua Smith, he got 11 added to his next one after Mike got eliminated, Mapstead got eliminated, and eventually ending up with Chase Oliver as the winner. Now, Jacob Hornberger was on this, but barely got any votes at all. And in the final round, Joshua Smith won. Now, who is Joshua Smith? Here is Joshua Smith. Here is Oliver, and here is Hornberger. Now, this is the Iowa primaries for the Libertarians, with Chase Oliver coming out on top, about 10 points less than what Trump did. And then you have Recton Ward, which you also saw on that other one, and Art Oliver, who actually isn't listed in the primaries of any of those states, showing that those primary ballot samples aren't exactly perfect. But actually looking up the Iowa ballot on this website will actually show that, it's not on there anymore because the race is already over. I would have to look and see if I can find the actual ballot for Iowa. But obviously, Art was on there, but he's not going to be on the next one. Anyways, he also won't be on the ballot in New Hampshire. Joshua Smith, if you're not aware, is the vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee, whereas Oliver was the nominee for the Georgia Senate in 2022 and candidate for the 5th District in 2020. Jacob Hornberger is the founder and president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, independent candidate from Virginia in 2002, and candidates in 2000 and 2020, who obviously lost out to Jo Jorgensen. And given how her nomination split at least 5 or 6 of the Libertarian parties away from the actual core Libertarian Party, because as you may remember, the Libertarian Party is not a unified party. It is actually 51 parties that call themselves the Libertarian that work together, who just so happen to manage to get themselves on the ballot in every single state. But 6 of those split apart, with one of those states actually having a schism, leaving 2 Libertarian parties inside the state. Now, whether or not they will condense around a single candidate, we shall see, but it seems right now that Oliver is actually the one who's more likely to get in, because a lot of people are not enthusiastic about Hornberger. And these other guys didn't really get a lot of votes. At least not in the South Carolina or the Iowa primaries. So, if I were to go by that, I can see the major candidates of the Republicans. Then they have a secondary candidate in Binkley and a tertiary candidate in Stuckenberg. Whereas there are 3 mainline Democrat candidates, but the rest of these would be considered tertiary. In this case, being in 2/3 or more of those 31 states, secondary being in 16 or more, and tertiary being in 5+. Secondary candidates, on the other hand, would be major party or major big name candidates that, for example, RCP is enthusiastic about, which would be Trump, Biden, Kennedy, West, Cornel West, and Jill Stein. But for the purposes of this, not only did I have Robert F. Kennedy and Jill Stein and Cornel West in here, I also can put in Jacob Hornberger, just in case, as the Libertarian candidate, and Chase Oliver as the other one, plus Jasmine Sherman, the Peace and Freedom, since she's in the primary ballots as much as Cornel West is. And then you have the tertiary ones that will take up some votes. The American Independent, who is at least big enough to have gotten in there. And if I were to go back here again to the election results, let us see. I think there was actually an American Independent candidate, but I can't exactly remember. There might not have been, but some of these listed as independent might have been. One candidate who might be in there is, of course, American Solidarity. Kanye West had many names for the party he was supposedly running for. This being, for example, Gloria La Riva was in Socialism and Liberation, the Peace and Freedom, the PSL, and the Libertary Union candidates. Whereas Kanye, let's see here, he would be Kanye West. Where are you? Oh, yeah, he was listed as an independent, unaffiliated, no party, and the birthday party. So I made his party the birthday party. Whereas Rocky De La Fonte was in Alliance, Independence Alliance, which is the Independent Party of New York, and the American Independent Party, just like James P. Bradley there, and Natural Law, Natural law being one of the minor third parties in Michigan, my home state. And then you have American Constitution, Brinkenship. Constitution Party had been broken off from the Republican Party long ago, as long as the Conservative Party of New York. And a lot of these other parties that were minor, but I put them on here. By the way, very good that the socialist parties are not united. Like, thank God. Progressive Party, Constitution. There were two Constitution parties in 2020. 2020 was a weird year. Socialist Equality Party. Yeah, thank God these socialist parties are not united. Anyways, the tertiary parties, we don't know who else will be running, and there might be some parties that happen to get in a very particularly large state like California, earning themselves 5th place automatically just because 500,000 people in California are just bored of the current system and vote for somebody. And yes, that did happen. If I go here, for example, California, Alliance, Socialist and Liberation, 51,000 votes again. And really, when the Socialism and Liberation Party is only in, let's see, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, on the ballot in 15 states, and I write in on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 states, 9 states. These green ones, I'm pretty sure I'm pretty sure they were actually on the ballot, so a write-in on 8 states, probably on the ballot in 19 states. Getting 85,000 votes, which is still too many votes for socialist for my peace of mind. But anyways, now these guys may not be on the actual ballot in the swing states that matter, which would be Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada, Georgia, and North Carolina, but these will be probably the people who are chosen by their parties and come in the top 7, or at least pretty close to it. Donald Trump for the Republicans, Joe Biden. By the way, Donald Trump will also probably be the Constitution Party's nomination with a different vice president candidate, depending, and probably also the candidate for the Conservative Party of New York as a secondary candidate. If you're not aware, in New York, if the Republicans and the Conservative Party both elect the same person, both those votes are added together and used to determine their actual number. It's in that FEC document I showed earlier. The same with Joe Biden. I believe he was on the Democrat and the Progressive Party. I'm not going to look that up right now, but his got added together too. Then you have Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Probably should write a junior in there because to differentiate him from his father. And I have a feeling he'll be in the No Labels Party, but I'm not sure yet. We shall see. And you have Green, Jill Stein, Kennedy refusing to run Green Party. Cornel West running for Peace and Freedom, or Independent, depending on what state he's listed in. Chase Oliver is the Libertarian, and James P. Bradley as the American Independent. And there might be a few other third-party candidates running as well, which I am continuing to analyze. This one being House, President, and Senate races in the viable category. Viable being an overstatement, hence why it's in parentheses. but 107 candidates nonetheless. Whereas the actually important candidates in theory are these ones. These actual 34 candidates. But, again, let's see here. Solidarity, Green, Independent, Libertarian, Prohibition, Socialism, Transhumanist Party. Transhumanist Party is not going to matter that much. But you got Chase Oliver, Mapston. I don't know why he put his phone number in there, but whatever. Hornberger. Then you got Claudia de la Cruz, Cook. And then for the actual Democrats, you have the mainline candidates that I mentioned before. And I discovered this list separate from the list, but they were both on Ballotpedia, getting the actual candidates from the FEC website, where you can get all the candidates and exclude them by party, exclude them by state, by district, by whether or not they are incumbents seeking re-election or not, exclude them, or if they raise money, which you can click on the actual name to get some campaign information. Click on the name and you can get information about the actual candidate, how much they spent, how much they raised, what party they're running for, when the other time periods that they run, what elections they've run in, because obviously some of them will update. But if I were to, that's Warhammer 40k. It's not anything what you think it might be. Let me see, where was I at? Oh yes, that is right. The viable candidates. So obviously, any candidate, such as, let's see here, take out the P. Palmer, Echtenberg, Stuckenberg, Schenck, Williamson, Tormat, Joshua, Sherman, Mapstead, Hornberger, Nicky, Binkley. See where I'm left with that. Yeah, that's right. Take out Phillips. And we got a bunch of green parties. Cook, Taylor, Toller, Independent. Take out that first one. Not going to matter. Take out Foreman. I don't have Bradley in here, but that doesn't matter too much. I could just add him back in. Seems like I removed him from this list too. I'd have to double check. He might not be important. He might not be. But it's possible. Then you got Cornel West. The Prohibition Party, which is also not going to matter. And then I don't have... Yeah, and then I have the two socialist parties in here, as well as Cornel West. So these 12, with Bradley probably being the 13th. Oh, no, I'm sorry. I left DeSantis in there. My bad. So with Bradley, that's going to be 12 candidates actually maybe worth something. Now, if it's going to be anything like 2020, coming again back here, only the top 10 candidates actually got over 10,000 But as you can see, it jumped from 11th place, which was actually Jade over here at 7,000. Then it jumped up to 10th place at 40,000. So out of these 12 candidates, 11 plus Bradley, what is likely to happen is that each of these will at least get 10,000 votes roundabout, making the race a little bit more interesting. But anyways, that is a long way to say that Biden is more or less screwed. Because despite the fact that he's been in a three-man race the entire time, he just doesn't be able to get any momentum whatsoever. Despite the fact that his candidates are very not well liked. Whereas Trump, his candidates are twice as well liked, if not 4 times as well liked as the Joe Biden opponents. Oops. So while Trump gobbles up all of Haley and DeSantis' votes for the most part, he will actually be higher approval amongst Republicans than Joe Biden will be when he gobbles up Williamson's and Phillips' votes. While Kennedy probably still has that 15% of Biden votes, which you can actually see here with the 13% data. So unless I can get Kennedy to drop out, which he won't, or they assassinate him, he is going to drain more votes from Biden than he is from Trump. And you can see that in the poll averages. Again, oops. So I'm looking forward to this race. I'll be very, very glad once it's over. But I am very white-pilled, or very red-pilled, depending on where I am during the day. Anyways, guys, that's it for now. Bye-bye.